Hey folks, Andy here, and today I'm going to do a slightly different video to the usual, and I'll try and keep it as brief and as concise as possible. But I want to talk to you about reading itself, about reading and how I read, and how I consume books, and also how I approach reading, because I was on a bit of a mission last year to increase the number of books that I read due to my sort of issue with my ears and it ruining how I listen to music. I used to consume over the last few years between 300 and 500 albums a year, which is an enormous amount of music. And due to my ongoing tinnitus problem, that's no longer possible. So I still listen to music, but I have to listen to it in a much more condensed manner, quieter. Break albums down to individual songs, which does disrupt the flow of albums. And I haven't the time or the ability to listen to as much as I used to want to listen to. I used to listen to an awful lot of stuff just for the sake of listening to it, whereas now I tend to spend my time just listening to stuff that I particularly want to listen to, which ultimately is really how it should be, I guess. And I've spent more time consuming books, although some of them I do listen to as I'll get through. And last year I managed to consume, which is probably the right word I'm going to use, 70 full-length novels. There were novellas and short stories I also read, but 70 full-length books. And what constitutes to a full-length book can vary from description to description, but they're all listed as full-length novels. So far this year I have managed 11 books with 3 or 4 to go. And I've had various people asking me how I managed to consume so many books. I don't consider that a huge amount, but I guess for the average person, it's more books than most people get through. And so I just want to talk a very brief about how I approach reading or consuming books, because it's not just reading, and my method of doing it, and also how I approach the subject of reading in the first place. So firstly, I tend to have, on average, 4 books on the go at once. I will always have one physical book, whether it's paperback or hardback. I will have one Kindle book. I will have one book that is electronic but not from a Kindle source, like an online book or a book that's been posted online for free. The Internet Archives is a great place for things like that. And then I will have one book on something like Audible or from YouTube. And I do this very specifically, firstly because it breaks these books up and they are all consumed in a different manner. 2 of them are electronic, but the visual way of looking at it is different. One on Kindle, one is a scan of a book, so they are different to look at. One obviously being physical, so that's different, and then one being Audible, again, is a different manner of approaching the book. So you sort of reduce fatigue of this a bit because of how different they are in how you consume them. I'm lucky in that what I do from day to day allows me to listen to stuff. So I tend to listen to my Audible books whilst I am working, and I will spend, of a 10-hour day, roughly 6 or 7 hours listening to books. I can generally consume the average, and if it's for an average novel is around 10 hours long, so I can generally consume one novel in 2 days if I listen to it in this approach. And there are some novels which are significantly bigger than that, which may take roughly a week to consume, but generally this is how I approach them. I won't listen to them for 6 or 7 hours solid. I'll generally listen to 2 or 3 hours, then take a 20 or 30 minute break from doing so, and then go back into it, with a lunch break in between whilst I'm obviously doing what I'm doing. And if I have to pause listening to concentrate a bit further on what I'll do, then so be it. But that's how I get through those books. So I tend to get through Audible books relatively quickly, either in a couple of days or at most a week. It's easy to get burnout and fatigue from doing this, I guess, because you're constantly just listening to something, but with sufficient breaks, it's manageable. I tend to read my Kindle books whilst I'm having my lunch, so I get through them at a much slower pace, but I will generally go through a Kindle whilst eating breakfast, lunch, or if I find myself by myself having dinner, doing it that manner. I tend to go through the non-Kindle books, which are scanned effectively from physical books, either when I'm putting my son to sleep and reading on my phone that way, or as the last thing I do at night, because when I go to bed every night, I read. It's one habit I have. I will spend between 30 and 60 minutes a night reading a book, and that's when I read a physical book. And when I start to get to the point where I'm particularly tired, that's when I'll put the book down, and I will then continue reading, but I'll read the Pan and Scan, for want of a better word, book in that manner until I feel my eyes are starting to go, and then I just stop. And I tend to structure how these books in that order, in that the ones that I listen to on Kindle tend to either be the ones that I listen on Audible tend to either be of a series. For example, at the moment I'm going through a lot of the James Patterson, Alex Cross books, and I find it's easy to go through them as a series. There's a number of Dean Koontz books I've done the same through. Anything that's got the same characters and a story that's building between books, they're effectively the equivalent of TV series, but in the written or audible form, and I tend to go through them in that manner because I don't need to concentrate as much on them, and they tend to be quite fast-paced, short chapters, etc. The alternative of that is if there is a book that is particularly big. Some of them Larsen books by Steve Erickson, for example, I've listened to the audible versions just because the books are so dense, over 1,000 pages long, etc. Some of them are close to 400,000 words, that there's a real sense of fatigue just reading something like that, whereas breaking it down over a 30 or 40 hour audible experience is, for me at least, more manageable. The Pan and Scan books tend to be things that I have less of an interest in, and tend to be shorter books. I try to find short books between 100 and 200 pages long, but something which is more just action, because I have less time to read. The Kindle books tend to be things that I really want to concentrate on. I tend to, I read them when I'm on my own, in my own little space, and I read them at a slow pace, but things that I really want to concentrate on. And then the physical books are a variety of whatever I'm in the mood for at that time. They can be short, large, fantasy, horror, thriller, sci-fi, it doesn't really matter, whatever mood I'm in. And that is how I read and how I consume books. It wouldn't work for everyone, but I have a very limited amount of free time, and I find that this works for me. If I'm out and about in the shops, I can still listen to an Audible book, for example, if you're doing the shopping for whatnot. So that's how I approach them. Now, in terms of the mindset of reading, I think a lot of people struggle getting into books because they don't know what book to read or how to read. And I have just some really simple rules about it. Like, I like a variety of different books, but I go through phases. So when I'm going through a horror phase and I just want to read horror stuff, I just embrace it. And every book that I will be either reading or listening to will be horror. I won't break it down and try and have some variety in what I'm reading. I don't think I need to. I will just read or listen to pure horror. And I'll try and find horror books that suit the parameters that I've set within physical, Kindle, Audible, and Pan and Scan. There will be points in which I've got a collection of horror books to get through, but I stop being interested in horror at that time, and I might be more interested in fantasy again, in which case there's nothing wrong with stopping those horror books and just reading fantasy. I don't believe that you need to necessarily complete a cycle before you get into the next one. It's whatever the mood suits you. You're supposed to read predominantly for pleasure, and if you're trying to read for the sake of learning or to challenge yourself, then that's a goal you've set up on yourself. Nobody else has, unless it's something you're supposed to do for education, etc. In which case, I guess you're stuck with it. But there's this stigma about people that start books and are reading books that they feel they should be reading, or struggle to get through books. And I believe that you should try and read what you want to read. If somebody recommends a book to you and it's not something you would normally have read, there's nothing wrong with trying it out. But if you haven't got into that book within the first 20 or 30 pages of reading, then there's no reason why you can't just put that book down and walk away from it and say, no, it's not for me. It may well be that it gets better, But again, life is too short to spend on reading stuff that you're not really that interested in. You wouldn't put a film on and sit there for the first half an hour and think, God, this is terrible. I'm going to watch the rest of this. And books typically take much longer to get through than films or albums or anything else, really. They're a longer form of entertainment medium. So I would recommend that if you haven't got into it within the first 20 or so pages of reading, there's no reason you can't walk away from it. Even if people have recommended it to and you want to get into it, if it's something that doesn't grab you, don't be afraid to go away from it. There's only one series of books that I've ever got through that I've been informed were great that I struggled with, which are the Malazan books, because of how obtuse they are in how they're written. And I struggled for the first two of those books, which is accumulation of probably the best part of 300,000 words of story, maybe more than that, to actually get through. So it was a lot, which is why I ended up listening to them on Audible, just to get through the story rather than embrace everything that was going on. And I've got a completely different and quite separate video I can do about Malazan series, because they are very dense. I've just realised the camera's getting closer and closer to my face there, frightening. But for everything else, yeah, if you're not really into it, don't be afraid to put it down. There's this stigma of people that don't finish books and feel like they should do, that they should finish it and get to the very end. So either that A, they finished the book, or B, that they haven't been beaten. But I've said elsewhere, it's been a very true saying, that if you are reading a book and you're not enjoying it and you get to the end purely to get to the end of it, then the book has beaten you. You haven't beaten the book. So don't be afraid to just put things down if you're not enjoying them and move on to something else. We should be reading for predominantly fun and entertainment and enjoying ourselves. And that's how it should be. So a slightly different and long-winded video, I know, but something a bit different to what I usually put up, and I just thought it would help explain my approach to reading and how I get through it, if for no other reason than it's just been fun to do. So thanks for watching, and I hope that you're reading some good stuff out there. If anybody's got any recommendations for horror, thriller, crime, sci-fi or fantasy that they would like me to read, or that they think maybe I've read and they'd like my opinion on, let me know in the comments. If I even get a single one, I don't expect to. I don't have a huge user base, but if anybody recommends something that I haven't read, I will give it a go. And if I have read it, I will quite happily talk about it. In the meantime, take care of each other, be kind to yourself, be kind to each other and yourself, and take care.